You want to stay inside this little map because it's working. You want to get from point A to point B, and this is good. This indicates that you are moving forward. That's the first thing it indicates. And the second thing it indicates, which is even more important, and you'll never hear this from behavioral psychologists, is that your map is correct. So every time you move a little bit forward and something that you want happens, it says, oh, the game I'm playing is the right game. And so not only does the reward indicate progress, it indicates that the frame within which progress is being calculated is the right frame. And that's good because it's the frame that makes things irrelevant. And you want them to stay irrelevant. So if you don't move forward and you start to question the frame, that's way worse than merely not moving forward. You get a bad exam grade. What do you think? What the hell am I doing in university anyways? It's like, probably that's not the first place you should go with that piece of information. And you think, well, why? Why is that worse? Well, as far as I can tell, your map of you as a university student is a comprehensive representation. It tells you what you should do every day. It kind of tells you where you're going in the future. And if something emerges as an anomaly, you get a worse grade than you expected, and you blow that whole map, it's like, okay, what have you been doing for the last 4 years? What kind of high school student were you? How clueless are you about how you're arranging your future? What's your identity going to be if you're not going to be a student? Where are you going to end up in 5 years? It's like, so it's like that little grade, that bad grade is like a portal through which snakes can crawl. And that's exactly how you respond to it, especially if you open the door too much. Well, maybe this means that I shouldn't be in university. Well, one of the rules is you want to constrain the anomalous event to the minimal necessary domain. It's really, really important. You want to do that when you're arguing with your partner, which you'll do all the time. We have an argument. Well, I should never have married you. It's like, no, that's not the first response. That's a bad response. Or here's a really good one. You've always done that sort of thing, and you always will. It's like, oh good, great. It's like the only answer to that is to hit someone. Because like you're done, right? You're like that, you've always been like that. There isn't a chance that you can be repaired and none of it is acceptable. It's like the person's going to fight with you right away because what else are they going to do? So what you want to do is you want to minimize, it isn't rationalization. You want to say, okay, this person did something that disrupted our joint map. Okay. What's the smallest possible thing they could do to put it back together? And you have to know. Well, we need to make a plan so you don't do it again. Or we need to have a discussion so that you know that it wasn't a good thing to do. But I'm not going to go after your whole character. I'm going to say, when I come home and you're watching TV, just come to the door and say hello. Not, don't you love me, or something like that. It's like, no, you just have to walk to the door and like give me a hug or something, and then that's good enough. And so then the other person might be able to tolerate that much corrective information, maybe, if you're kind of nice about it, and you also understand that they're probably going to have something equally horrible to say about you in the next 15 minutes, because you're going to do something stupid. So you don't want to open the door so that every possible snake comes crawling through. Because that's a pathway to depression. And you actually see that happening in depressed people, is that every small event produces a cascade through their entire value system, and they end up saying, well, that's just another reason that I should jump off a bridge. And they really see it that way. It's really awful, because they've got no defenses. It's like, well, I didn't do so well in this course. It's like I'm going to get a bad mark in the exam. I'm going to get a bad mark in the course. That's going to screw up my ability to finish my degree. I'm never going to get into the field of my choice. It's just another piece of indication that I'm useless and that life isn't worthwhile. Bang, I'm going to jump off a bridge. And if you're really depressed, it's like each of those things hits you with the certainty of truth. It's really not good. And so you want to be careful. You want to be careful about walking down that pathway when you make a mistake. You think, okay, what's the narrowest framework of interpretation within which I can understand this that will require minimal behavioral change to decrease the probability that it will happen again? It's mental hygiene, fundamentally. Yes?
When you say that these frames are scalable,
yeah,
there's multiple at the same time?
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. That is the next question. It's because they don't exist in isolation. So, and that's another thing frequently when you hear behavioral accounts of cognitive processes, they generally only focus on as if it's an isolated thing. It's not. It's scalable. It's scalable a bunch of ways. It's scalable temporally, because what you do now is associated with what you'll do tomorrow, and that with what you'll do next week, and so forth. So it has to be scalable temporally, and it's also scalable socially, right? So it has an effect on you, that has an effect on your family, that has an effect on the community, and so forth. And so you don't want to take, it's very difficult to think through the effect of your action on all those scaling levels simultaneously, but you have mechanisms that allow you to do that. And we'll see, I think that the sense of, let's assume that you're not lying to yourself constantly, so your head isn't full of chaos and garbage, and you have reasonable relationships with people in the world. I think that, and this is leaping way ahead, I think that your sense of meaningful engagement with what you're doing is the psychophysiological marker that you're acting in a way that takes all of the stacked representations into account simultaneously. Because you're trying to figure out where you are. And you might think, well, that means where I am in this room. But look, this room is not a simple thing, right? It's nested. It's a subset of the university. That's a subset of society. It's a subset of your life. The room is a complicated thing. And you need to figure out where you should be in the room. And you can't do that surely with perception, because all you see is me and some of the wall, right? You got this little narrow portal, and so you can't really rely on your perceptions to orient you, but you do orient yourself. And I think what you do is it's engagement. It's like, does this seem meaningful and deep and engaging? Yes. Then it's an indication that it's serving multiple masters simultaneously. So maybe both socially and also temporally. And so I think the sense of meaning is actually an instinct that orients people in time and space. It's not an epiphenomena. It's the most fundamental form of perception. And that's the only optimistic thought that I've ever been able to derive from psychology, is that actually could be true. It could be that the sense of meaning is an orienting reflex. And that would be wonderful if it was true, because it would make it real, and it's one of the devastating elements of nihilism is something like, well, who the hell cares what you're doing? What difference is it going to make in a million years? It's like your sense of meaning is just an illusion. You're a limited creature in a limited place, and nothing you do really matters. It's like, that's a powerful argument, especially if you're an objective materialist and a reductionist. It's a killer argument, but it looks to me like it's wrong. It's actually wrong, because meaning looks to me like it's an actual phenomenon. It does say that you're positioned properly between chaos and order, something like that.
How do you maintain a stable identity when you are plagued by bouts of depression and anxiety? Well, the first thing we might say is that you can't. You know what I mean? If you're plagued by bouts of depression and anxiety, that does destabilize your identity. So it's almost by definition. But having said that, look, this is when habit and plan and strategy are so useful. So in the periods of depression that I've had, and some of them were long and certainly the most unpleasant experiences of my life, this is when you need a philosophy, let's say, that's allied with your vision and your strategy to sustain you. Because what would happen to me is that, I have a vision, and I suppose the vision is of a world that's better, that's less likely to descend into ideological catastrophe, and where people are more responsible and more awake and more educated and healthier. All of that, a vision of a better world, a world that's less hellish at least, but also a better world, and some sense of what role I might play in that. And so that's very motivating. Like, it's a profound goal to try to make things better. And you can do that locally. You can do that for yourself. You can do that for your family. You can do that for the broader community. And all of that's worth it, man. It's worth making some sacrifices for. It's worth suffering for to some degree. And then you decompose that into the day-to-day and week-to-week strategies and actions that you're undertaking, the plans and the activities that you're putting forward to make that dream a reality, to realize it. And then when the depression and anxiety come along, you think, part of it with depression, it's just bloody endurance. It's like you get up and you work through the next hour, you try to stay on track, you try to implement your strategic plans to the best of your ability. And you hope and you pray that you'll get through it. You know, you'll get through it and that the darkness will recede. And you stay on track. You eat even though you're not hungry. You get up even though you want to stay in bed. You interact with people even though you'd rather be alone. And it's the benefit of disciplined habits can sustain you. It's like the boat you're rowing in through a terrible storm, leaks and all, and maybe you'll be overwhelmed, but you have the boat and you can row forward, and that's what you've got. And so endurance is a huge part of it. And then I would say with its anxiety, it's the same thing. It's like, or very much the same, as you're terrified and uncertain, but you move ahead to the best of your ability. And again, you operate at least to some degree on hope. And if you haven't got hope, then you've got blind, bloody endurance. And that's all motivated by some sense that you're working towards something that's worthwhile working toward, you know, and that is, well, that's your own long-term well-being, to treat yourself properly. It's the stability and productivity and harmony and health of your family. That's a huge deal. And then it's whatever benefit you can be to the community. And if you have to limp along and drag yourself forward in order to maintain that pathway, then so be it, because it's better than the alternative. So, and I know that you can become depressed enough so that, you know, you're virtually immobilized, but you do what you can to fight it, and then you do what you can to treat it. You know, it's like, have you tried antidepressants? Have you gone to speak to a professional? Have you done what you need to do to investigate the causes of your depression and anxiety? Because often there's physical reasons that might be the case. You know, like I've learned notoriously that a fair bit of the negative emotion that I experienced seemed to be associated with an autoimmune problem that was associated with food sensitivity. Jesus, like I would have never believed that was possible 10 years ago, even though I had learned by that point that my susceptibility to negative emotion was definitely exacerbated, for example, if I was hungry. So I knew there was some relationship with food, but I had no idea that it was as profound as it turned out to be. And so, and then, well, the other thing you can do too is that as the negative emotion ramps up in intensity, the amount of time that you construe as manageable shrinks. You know, and if you're extremely depressed and anxious, then, you know, you may be struggling to get through the day. And then you need a map of what is going to constitute a minimally acceptable day. And that might be one where you've done what you need so that when you wake up tomorrow, things aren't worse, right? You have to keep up with your obligations and your duties at least enough so that you're not degenerating downhill. And you know, the other thing too is that you also learn that you act out the things that you would do when you're normal, even when you're depressed. You know, you don't want to see people. Well, it doesn't matter. You go see them because it's better than not seeing them. You know, and you find when you do see them that it's better, it'll go better than you think, but you can't isolate yourself. And you're anxious, and so you want to avoid. You don't want to go out. You'd rather stay home and sit in the chair and just sit there and like in a frozen position. It's like, you can't do that. You have to go out and go grocery shopping and go out and have coffee and all of those things. It doesn't matter whether you enjoy them. It matters that you do them because that's what you do. That's what you do in order to maintain your health. And so a huge part of it is like head down endurance. And that'll get you through bad times, that endurance. It's such an underrepresented virtue, that ability to trudge forward unhappily under a unfairly burdensome load is a testament to character, if you can. And it's something that should be encouraged and valued. So, you know, and I'm not making the claim that people who are depressed, who can't get out of bed, lack endurance. Some do and some don't, because depression comes in very varied degrees of intensity, and you can be laid out completely by depression. So I'm not trying to make some arbitrary judgment about who's got endurance and who hasn't. You can't do that from the outside, but I can say that endurance is one of the tools you have to deal with chronic discomfort and pain. And even if you have chronic pain, it's interesting because it's very much allied with depression, by the way. All of the research on chronic pain, back pain, for example, indicates, and chronic pain of all sorts, is that the more you allow your pain to render you inactive, the worse the outcome, including exacerbation of the pain. And depression is a pain disorder, and so that's very much worth thinking about too. It's like, move forward, move forward, move forward. And if you need to talk to somebody about what your plan is for the day or the hour or the week, then do that as well. And perhaps you also have to help get the people around you to help a bit. I need a little bit of help getting up in the morning. I need to have breakfast made for me, so that all I do when I get up in my terrible state of fog and confusion and terrible anxiety and depression is I have a shower, because that's what happens first. And then the next thing is I eat. And then that's better. At least you're out of bed and moving, and that's a start, So, and then you endure and hope. And that's how it is. And you do the same thing when someone in your family is sick or when you're facing a death. All of that. It's like one bloody foot in front of the other, up the hill.
The first thing I would say is that if you're dealing with someone who's depressed and they're really depressed, you should try giving them antidepressants. Because if they die, you can't help them. Okay, so if you're suffering, you are obligated, in a sense, to hold on to whatever rope someone throws you. And one of the things I do with my clients all the time, especially if they're really in trouble, is to tell them, look, I don't know exactly what's going to help you, but don't arbitrarily throw out any possibilities, because you might not have that luxury. Antidepressants help a lot of people, and there are technical reasons why that's the case. So that's a simple answer. It's not relevant to what I already described, except that if you're offered a gift by your society and it works, try it. I don't care what your presuppositions are. Apart from that, lots of the time you see people who are suffering with depression, for example. There's a multitude of reasons, but I'll take one common reason. You could think about it as associated with the story of Peter Pan. Now, Peter Pan is someone who won't grow up, right? Now, the problem with Peter Pan is he gets to be king, but it's king of Neverland. Neverland doesn't exist. So being king of nothing isn't that helpful. Well, one of the things that you often see with people who suffer from depression, and I'm not making a blanket statement about the cause of depression, because there's lots of them, is that people who don't have enough order in their life tend to get overwhelmed. So, for example, if someone comes into me and to see me and they say they're depressed, I always ask them a very standard set of questions. Do you have a job? If you don't have a job, you're really in trouble in our society. First of all, your biological rhythms tend to go off the rails right away, because there's no reason to go to bed at any particular time, and there's no reason to get up. And for many people, if they don't get up at the same time, they foul up the functioning of their circadian rhythms, and that's enough to make them depressed right off the bat, especially if they start napping during the afternoon. They also don't have a purpose. People aren't good without a purpose. And this isn't hypothesizing. We absolutely understand the circuitry that underlies positive emotion. We know how it works. Almost all the positive emotion that any of you are likely to experience in your life will not be a consequence of attaining things. It will be a consequence of seeing that things are working as you proceed towards a goal you value. That's completely different. And you need to know this, because people are often stunned. For example, they finish their PhD thesis and their presupposition is that they're going to be elated for a month, and often instead they're actually depressed, and they think, oh, what the hell, I've been working on this for 7 years and I handed it in, and what do I do now? And that's what depresses them, right? It's the what do I do now? Well, they're fine if they enjoyed it, pursuing the thing. As long as it was working out, they get a lot of enthusiasm and excitement out of that, because that's how our nervous systems work. Most of your positive emotion is goal pursuit emotion. If you take drugs like cocaine or amphetamine, the reason they're enjoyable is because they turn on the systems that help you pursue goals. That's why people like them. So if you don't have a job, you got no structure, that's not good. Plus, you tend not to have a point. So you're overwhelmed by chaotic lack of structure, and you don't have any positive emotion. Well, do you have any friends? So sometimes you see people who are depressed, they have no job, they have no friends, they have no intimate relationship, they have an additional health problem, and they have a drug and alcohol problem. My experience has been if you have 3 of those problems, it's almost impossible to help you. You're so deeply mired in chaos that you can't get out because you make progress on one front and one of your other problems pulls you down. So one of the things I tell people who are depressed is like, don't sacrifice your stability. Get a job, even if it's not the job you exactly want. Get a damn job, you need a job. Find some friends. Get out in the dating circuit. See if you can establish an intimate relationship. Put together some of the foundational items that are like pillars that your life rests on. Well, that's the practical thing to do. So that's one example with regards to depression. You got to negotiate with the person, and you also got to teach them to negotiate with themselves, and this is something that's very useful to know. You can tyrannize yourself into doing things, but I wouldn't recommend it. What I would recommend instead is that you ask yourself what you're willing to do. It's a really effective technique. It's like a meditative technique. So for example, you can get up in the morning and you can think, well, I'd like to have a good day today, so I'd like to go to bed tonight without feeling guilty because I, didn't do some things I said I was going to do, and I'd like to have kind of an interesting day. So you got to fulfill my responsibilities, and I want to, enjoy the day. Then you can ask yourself, well, okay, what would I have to do in order for that to happen that I would do? And the probability, if you practice this for 3 or 4 days, is your brain will just tell you. It'll say, well, there's that piece of homework that you haven't done for like 3 weeks. You should knock that sucker off because it would only take you 10 minutes and you've been avoiding it and torturing yourself to death for, like 72 hours straight. And if you do that, here's a little interesting thing you can do. And, maybe this is little obligations you should clean up. And so what you do in a situation like that is you teach the person to negotiate with themselves. Say, well, let's figure out what your aims are. You got to have some aims. Whatever they are. And they might say, well, I'm so depressed I don't have any aims. And then I say, well, pick the least objectionable of the aims and act it out for a while and see what happens. Because sometimes your emotional systems are so fouled up that you have to pretend, you have to act the thing out before you can start to believe it. I mean, people always assume they have to believe and then act, but sometimes that's true and lots of times it isn't. So the trick, if you're doing therapeutic work with someone and you're helping them establish a structure, is to find out what they'll do. Now, if they want to get better, which is not a given, because there are often payoffs for not getting better. That's basically the payoffs of being a martyr, or maybe the payoffs of doing what your entirely pathological family members want you to do because they actually want you to fail. Assuming you want to get better, there's usually something you can figure out that would constitute a step towards some sort of concrete goal. And my presumption, it's a behavioral presumption fundamentally, is that small accruing gains that repeat are unbelievably powerful. So, this is another thing to know about in your own life. It's something I learned in part from reading the writings of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who's a great Russian philosopher and novelist. He said, you can look at your life and you can see what isn't right about it. I mean, all you have to do is look. And then you can start to fix that. And the way you fix it is by noticing what you could in fact fix. People are often trying to fix things they can't fix, which I would not recommend, because if you try to fix something you can't fix, you'll just ruin it. Like, you can find all sorts of undergraduates who are perfectly willing to restructure the international economic system who cannot keep their room clean. And there's actually a gap there, and it's surprising that people don't actually notice. So I would say, if you pay attention, you can see things that you could fix. They yell at you. They really do. We even know how that happens. Let me give you an example, because rooms are full of stories, and the stories have effects on you. So here's a classic experiment. So you take 2 groups of undergraduates, you bring them into your lab, and you give one group a multiple choice test that has a bunch of words in it that are associated with being old, and you give the other group the same multiple choice test, except the words are associated with being young. This is independent of the content of the test. It's just descriptions. And then you time the undergraduates as they walk back to the elevators. The ones who completed the multiple choice test that had more words associated with aging walk slower back to the elevators. And they don't know that. And they don't know they're doing it. And that study's been replicated in various forms many, many times. You're unbelievably sensitive to the story that your environment's telling you. Because your environment is not made out of objects. That's just wrong. Your environment is basically made out of something like tools and obstacles. You're a tool-using creature, you're a tool-perceiving creature. The things you, like if I take you out of this room and I say, well, what was in the room? You're not going to say, random patterns in the carpet, because they're real. They're just as good an object as anything else. You're going to say chairs because you can sit on them, and You're going to say handrails because you can hold them. You're going to say stairs because you can walk down them. That's what you see, and that's what you interact with. And if you pay attention to your environment, which is you, by the way, extended, all of your experience is you. It will tell you all the time what you should do. All you have to do is do it. But then you have to decide if you want to do it. One of the things I've noticed about people, because I've wondered, once I started studying these mythological stories, and I got this idea about the fact that life can be meaningful enough to justify its suffering. I thought, God, that's such a good idea. Because it's not optimistic exactly. You know, some people will tell you, well, you can be happy. It's like, those people are idiots. I'm telling you, they're idiots. There's going to be things that come along that flatten you so hard you won't believe it. And you're not happy then. And so if life is to be happy, well, in those situations, what are you doing? Why even live? But life isn't to be happy. If you're happy, you're bloody fortunate, and you should enjoy it. You should, because it's the grace of God, so to speak. With regards to meaning, I thought, well, people know when they're doing something meaningful. They can tell, so why the hell don't they do meaningful things all the time? It seems obvious. You could do it. I mean, it's hard, you know, because other people want you to do other things, and it's a struggle, but everything's a struggle. And then I thought, well, oh, I get it. I see why. It took me about 10 years to figure this out. People have a choice. Choice number one, nothing you do means anything. Well, that's kind of a drag, right? It's meaninglessness of life and all that, existential angst. You know, that's kind of a pain. But the upside of nothing that you do is meaningful is you don't have to do anything. You've got no responsibility. Now, you have to suffer because things are meaningless, but that's a small price to pay for being able to be completely useless. The alternative is everything you do matters. Really. If you make a mistake, it's a real mistake. If you betray someone, you tilt the world a little more sharply towards evil rather than good. It matters what you do. Well, if you buy that, then you can have a meaningful life.